Hi everyone, Gareth here. Just to let you know that if you would like to support the production of the Music Room podcast, you can just head to musicroompodcast.uk/support or click the link in the show notes. Okay, on with the show. Welcome to the Music Room. This time in the Music Room.
Alex hasn't turned up to geography today, but I can hear him in the practice room.
He's around here somewhere.
So let's just... Yeah, it's obviously when it came to the crunch point, I was sent back to geography, for example. But sometimes they turned a blind eye, and I think, they recognised that I was just kind of exploring and enjoying playing.
Hello and welcome to the Music Room, the show where I chat with composers, songwriters and musicians. Today you're going to hear from a brilliant composer and get a cool offer on a sample library. On both counts, you're welcome. Alex Parsons is a musician and composer based in London, known for his work in film and television. He also recently worked on Trails, a signature sample library developed with Fracture Sounds. And I have an exciting bit of news on that front, so let's get into the music stories. As I mentioned, Fracture Sounds recently announced a brand new signature library that Alex Parsons has worked on called Trails. If you haven't heard about this yet, Trails is a collection of evocative soundscapes and string features, including the amazing dulcichord, which Alex will be talking about shortly. Will Bedford at Fracture Sounds was only too happy to give you lovely listeners a discount on top of the intro price. So let me give you some numbers. Normal price is £129. The introductory price is £89. And that will last until March the 21st, 2024. And Will has given you an extra £10 off, taking it to £79. So if you grab this while the intro price is in place for the next week or so, you're getting this for a steal. The gift code for that £10 off is Music Room, all in capital letters, and I've put a link to Trails in the show notes as well. And finally, Ollie Julian and Music Room guest Nick Foster have teamed up to score the Apple TV Plus original series, The Completely Made Up Adventures of Dick Turpin. The show is created by Claire Downs, Ian Jarvis and Stuart Lane and has a cast packed with talent led by Noel Fielding. The six-part comedy follows the titular legendary British highwayman as he sets out on a journey of wildly absurd escapades when he's made the reluctant leader of a band of outlaws and is tasked with outwitting a corrupt lawman and self-appointed thief-taker. I've seen a couple of episodes. It's ridiculous and very chucklesome. And Nick and Ollie, that theme tune is a banger. And those are the music stories. Alexander Parsons is a musician and composer based in London, known for his work in film and television. Recent scores include the Netflix miniseries Who Killed Jill Dando, the feature documentary Coco Chanel Unbuttoned, Sky's most highly rating drama doc Flight 73, and Grierson's shortlisted Amazon Prime series Curse of the Chippendales, produced by the Oscar-winning team at Lightbox. Let's get into the Music Room to hear from Alex himself. Alex Parsons, composer, welcome to the Music Room.
Thanks very much, Gareth. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. How's it going today?
It's been a nice day today, actually. Yeah, it's been one of those days where I know I've got quite a lot of work to do, but actually it's been quite lovely work. When we record at home, it's always a bit of a privilege. It's a lovely thing to do every day. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
You mentioned a social media ban before recording. Is that something you do a lot? Is that a new thing that you're trying out just to get your head down?
I mean, it's very much kind of if I know I've got a deadline coming up, then it's very sensible to at least limit social media. You can just pick up your phone and look at cats all day, which is very much my thing. Cats and chihuahuas. So, I'll spend a long time looking at those if I'm not very focused and So yeah, that's me at the moment.
I agree. I think my Instagram feed is 90% puppies.
Yeah, best way to be.
Absolutely. Yes, I noticed you have, was it 3 dogs I saw on your Instagram?
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah, I've got 3 chihuahuas. I'm hoping that they don't kick off now, which is pretty standard for any important Zoom call or any important whatever they decide to kick off because the doorbell goes. But they're very sweet and I love them.
Yes. Well, don't worry. I love dogs. So if they interrupt, then that's absolutely fine by me.
Great.
So you do seem to have a lot going on at the moment. And one very interesting thing that you've been involved with is a brand new sample library from Fracture Sounds called Trails. What is Trails? How did it come about? What's the reaction been like?
Trails, it was a conversation between myself and Will Bedford from Fracture. Lovely guy. We'd been speaking for a little while, years ago now. And, we both share a love of climbing. So decided that when he was down in London, from Huddersfield, which is where he's based, we'd have a bit of time on the climbing wall. So we did a session, and then afterwards, we were talking about Fracture and their brilliant sample libraries that they make. And he said, we should do something. And, as you do, you just say, yeah, I'd love that. And then nothing happens for, quite a while. And then I guess it was in COVID, really. I got this little tiny tabletop piano called a dulcichord. And I got it after I'd finished working on a film called Rockfield, which was about an old studio. And it happened to be just one of the keyboard techs that was working there at the time. He'd seen the film. He sort of said, he got in touch and just said, look, I've got this little piano. And we'd been speaking on Facebook about it as well. And it seemed this curious little thing. So I sort of popped round and had a go and ended up bringing it home with me. And, oh gosh, it's this strange but beautiful little thing. It doesn't sound like a traditional piano at all. It's much sort of higher in pitch and it's got quite a thin tone, but it's very beautiful and apparently really rare. So I was very lucky. So Will and I started talking again, and then I think it was just coming to the end of lockdown. We thought, why not sample this? So we did that, and then probably sat on that for a year. And then it just kind of grew from there. We kept talking and then decided that actually I didn't want to make a sample library as such. That didn't really, I love sample libraries and of course they come in handy every day here. But the sample libraries I like the most are much more like instruments. They feel like their own instrument in their own right. And I was very keen to not just make an instrument of my own violin and my own dulcichord. It was giving access to some of those instruments for everyone. I'm very kind of lucky to have quite a nice collection of instruments that I've collected over the years. And it's brilliant to be able to share that and to share, my violin as well. But then to allow composers and musicians to be able to adjust that and make it their own. And that's really what we wanted. And I think, the style of Trails, it's very much a textural tool. It's to add interest to, it's not supposed to, replace a live player at all. You couldn't actually, apart from maybe the dulcichord, it would be quite difficult to play melodic lines in it. It's not the intention to then use that and then be replaced by a musician. It's more to complement it. And so, it's a textural interest creator, I'd like to say.
Nice. You've created a whole new genre.
Really happy with it.
Of sample library.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of points there. One is I had no idea there was a connection with Rockfield, because A, that's a brilliant documentary. Loved that. Oh. And B, I used to live down the road from Rockfield, so there's a kind of oh my word, it feels a bit close to home. And then the second thing is I've been using it, and the textural element is absolutely what it's all about. It's kind of blending those raw sounds and getting a balance between how much raw you want and how much of the effect. And there are lots of effects, let's face it. And the whole granular sample section as well. Absolutely brilliant.
Oh, well, I'm glad you like it. It was all, the granular idea came from, the way I use modular. Yeah. I've got a sort of small modular setup here. And I quite often like creating these little patterns and loops using it. And we were just thinking of there must be a way that we can recreate that somehow. And Will is brilliant at coming up with ways of doing things. And Fracture already had a granular engine that we could sort of tap into a little bit. So it was great.
I've been writing a track using your sample library in the last day or so, because it's so you just want to jump in and use it, which is, I guess, what you want. What's it feel like to have other composers using your kind of signature sound in their compositions? It must be a bit weird, isn't it?
I think it's great. I think, my whole idea behind it was kind of giving access, like I said, to some of these instruments. And I think what's so amazing about it is I've heard quite a few demos now. I think some of the composers some composers have created some really brilliant demos. And that was before the release. And each one is completely different. And it's weird. I don't hear myself in those at all. I hear those composers. And I think that's what I love so much about it. Yeah, it's my violin, it's great. It's great to kind of have some of that sound, to hear that in there. That's a lovely feeling. But also, my really good friend and a cellist who I've collaborated with many times, called Joe Zeitlin. He performed all the cello parts, and it's just brilliant to hear his playing in different ways as well and being used in different ways. So yeah, I love it.
Well, congratulations on that, and hope that goes well for you.
Oh, thank you.
Now, when I prepare for these episodes, I like to obviously listen to the music of the guests, and you have a lovely selection, variety of genres on your website, from the Coco Chanel doc through to Black Power, A British Story of Resilience, and Curse of the Chippendales. So there's a quite wide variety of genres. What's your point of access when you're starting on a new production? How do you find your way in?
Well, it's really listening to a lot of music. I think, one thing that I always said when choosing whether to work on a project, or, you spend a long time with a project. And I always said to myself, it's got to be something that I'm going to really enjoy working on. And for me to enjoy it, it's got to satisfy something kind of creatively, or it's got to be just a bit of fun. Like Chippendales, you mentioned, was just such a wild story. It's a story of partying in the 70s and 80s. It's a story of murder. It's, espionage. It's completely wild. And it allowed me to kind of write music in an 80s style, which I'm really into anyway. But get a funk band together and work in the 70s for that moment, but also kind of a lot more modern in the sort of true crime element of it as well. There was that sort of really broad range. And, for me, that's the kind of thing that I look for. So it's something that will kind of enable me to, just really enjoy working on it.
Great. And I've seen you recording in all sorts of places as well. Your Instagram feed is really informative. It's great for following composers and creative people, actually, Instagram, because you can really see behind the scenes, can't you? So you've been recording in places like Real World Studios, for instance. You were playing in a forest for some reason, Abbey Road. But along with a lot of composers, including me, actually, you get to record at home a lot of the time, which I'm sure we'll touch on when we go back in time. But how's that evolved for you from, when you started out to now? I can see behind you what an amazing space you have.
Yeah, thanks. It's I've only actually been in this space for 2 months. We had a bit of building work going on, and I sort of toyed with the idea of renting a space, but actually, it's really expensive, and hours tend to be quite long. I think, many of us composers, I'm sure very well, when it comes to crunch time, you're working very long hours, and actually it's really nice to be able to just get to bed straight after. Or if you forget something, you don't have to travel to the studio, you can just walk to the other room and get it. If you're kind of lucky enough to have another room to work in, which I'm very pleased that I do.
Okay then, are we ready to go back in time to see how it all began?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Here we are, back in time.
I feel different though, somehow.
Good, yes, doodly-doo. Okay, so Alex, how did it all start for you? How young do you remember being when you first became aware of music?
Really young, actually. I was introduced to music very young, at the age of 4. So I was, I started having music lessons it was quite it's quite known, it's Suzuki method was the kind of method that for which I learnt violin. And so, you're introduced to music at a very young age, and there's a lot of listening involved. So, my earliest memories of music are having a very, very small, I can't remember whether it was a 16th or a 32nd size violin, which probably isn't much bigger than my hand. But yeah, my earliest memories are sort of being in a huge group. I think there are about 20 to 30 of us all playing together in the room of my old violin teacher's, it's his front room. And every single weekend, we would get together, all age groups. At the time when I was 4, I was playing with violinists up to the age of 18.
Wow.
And so we were all playing together, scratching away.
So do you remember it being a desire of yours, or, did you have parents who were musical and wanted the same for their children? Or, can you kind of pinpoint why you were playing at 4?
Yeah, I think my first interest, to answer your question, neither of my parents were musicians. My dad was a counter in a sort of, not in a folk band, but, he'd go to sort of...
counter?
folk gigs when he was younger, and he would sort of count along, which is kind of quite interesting. So he always loved music.
I wondered how folk bands actually did it.
I say folk, it might be line dancing. I wish I'd had a longer conversation with him about this. But neither of my parents were musicians and are musicians. But they always they were just really encouraging to me. And I do remember when I must have been 4, I suspect, and wanting to play the cello deeply, I don't know where it came from, but I was told I was too small to play the cello, which thinking back is probably correct. I'm not a large guy. So, the alternative was violin. And so my parents both were very encouraging, and I was able to go along to this really amazing and inspiring teacher who I stayed with from the age of 4 until I left school.
That's quite amazing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
You must have had that really lovely influence right from that age to stay with that teacher all that time.
It was always there, in those lessons, but it became a family, really.
Yeah.
As funnily enough, I bumped into someone I used to learn with just the other night. I went to a concert at Windsor Castle with my mum, and it was just it was a Christmas thing that had been cancelled a couple of times for various reasons. So we went along to this concert, and one of my oldest friends from violin lessons was in the orchestra in the Royal Philharmonic, and it's just so lovely to see that, and it just brings back all these memories. But you spend every weekend, every Saturday together for 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it just becomes a family.
Amazing.
It was lovely.
Quite amazing. So you, from the age of 4, I guess you started going through the grades during that time. Were you exposed to more community playing? So playing in orchestras, you're a violinist, so I assume there was an orchestra involved somewhere or along the way? Yeah,
so I did go through the grades. It was never a focus of my teacher. I think with violin, I only actually did grade 5, grade 7 and grade 8. It was never a focus, and specifically with Suzuki as well, it's very much about listening and playing in groups. And yes, orchestral playing was very much part of it. I played in youth orchestras when I was young, which are brilliant. It's lovely to kind of be part of, that sort of thing. I always used to remember, because I really enjoyed the idea that I could just sit back and relax while playing a piece of music. And sometimes if you're playing a really long symphonic piece, you'd go into this, or I would at least, just go into this strange meditative state. And I realized that just been reading the notes in front of me, but just really enjoying just being immersed in this playing until you get told to wake up, I suppose.
I was in the county orchestra, and there'd be Friday night rehearsals. I turned up late once, and they were already playing, and I got pointed to percussion. I was a cellist, so completely different. So off I scuttled to percussion because there was no one there either. And honestly, the panic that comes over you when you realise there's nothing for like 70 bars and then one hit. The amount of counting involved. Whereas if there's something on the page, you can just, like you say, you go into kind of almost like a trance-like state and really just float along with the music, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's brilliant. I was very lucky to have, actually, it was an amazing orchestra at school. And you said you rehearsed on a Friday. We always rehearsed on why Friday? Why Friday night?
Because Friday night was the one orchestra's rehearsal in the county, and then Saturday morning was a different orchestra in the county.
Yeah.
So that's, they just kind of split it up.
Yeah, I always found it was always on a Friday. You lose your older members then. I remember getting to sixth form and Friday night rehearsals became a little less desirable.
Yeah. I guess for the teachers as well, as part of the working week, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Poor teachers.
Yeah. Poor teachers. So I presume then, if you were so embedded in this way of living, constant music, that you did higher education qualification of some sort?
Yeah, so, I stayed at school. Obviously, GCSE music was something that, was very much, I would obviously have chosen that. That's what I was really interested in. So I followed that through to A-level. It was funny at my school. I was, because I went to school in Lewisham, which was very close to Goldsmiths University. And at the time, I remember just playing gigs in a band right opposite Goldsmiths. So I never really understood what Goldsmiths was about. I thought, well, surely a university in Lewisham isn't where I should be going. But I remember going to the open day and just thinking, wow, this place is going to let me do what I want to do. Which, partly I didn't really know. And I think that was what the beauty of Goldsmiths was for me. So yes, in order to answer your question, I did go into higher education. I did a music degree at Goldsmiths. And I ended up staying there for a master's straight after as well. And I think what really grabbed me about that university is that they just completely encouraged me to just follow what I wanted to do. The idea of, I've never got on very well with rules. I don't mean I was a total nightmare. I was a bit of a nightmare. But, when it came to studying, I worked really, really hard if I was allowed to do that myself. And I got that, I think they worked that out at school. And I was really lucky that I was given so much encouragement in that. They recognised that actually Alex hasn't turned up to geography today, but I can hear him in the practice room.
He's around here somewhere.
So let's just, it's obviously when it came to the crunch point, I was sent back to geography, for example. But sometimes they turned a blind eye. And I think, they recognised that I was just kind of exploring and enjoying playing. And I didn't really realise that at the time. But I kind of look back and think, they knew. And, that encouragement to go somewhere like Goldsmiths, where that is precisely what you're left to do. It's just such a inspiring environment.
Wow.
To be in.
Lovely. So out you come to the world after Goldsmiths. Did you have an idea that you wanted to pursue a career as a composer? Did you have any idea about what you wanted when you left Goldsmiths?
When I was at Goldsmiths, I did score a short film, and I remember really enjoying that. It was actually kind of a collection of short animated films, and I sort of fell into it really just because, a friend of mine who was an animator and also a musician, he just happened to break his arm at the worst possible moment of creating this little tiny sort of late night Channel 4 animation. And so I ended up composing a score for this little series. And I just loved it. I had no idea how to do it. I borrowed my housemate's laptop and hit play on that at the same time as I started hit play on mine. I didn't even realize that you could combine video and audio. It was all a bit of guesswork, but I kind of loved that. And I loved sort of making strange sounds for it, using my violin, using field recordings around New Cross and all sorts. We did some sort of really interesting things. And so I loved that sort of freedom. And I loved the way that you could just explore sounds and work with something. So the picture, the film, or, the story is dictating what I should choose and the direction in which I should go. So, I wouldn't say that I left Goldsmiths wanting to score films. I loved film and I loved telly, but I still was exploring things. So actually, I left Goldsmiths and I became a secondary school teacher for quite a long time. So music teacher, I would teach, all the way up from Key Stage 3 up to A level. So full on secondary school, and that was part-time. And had a music production school, which I ran from my parents' garage. So I bought I saved up, bought a couple of iMacs, and, I ended up teaching DJs because I was DJing electronic music most weekends in clubs, pretty much throughout university, actually. So I would invite DJs to mine, and we'd, look at how to write electronic music in my studio.
Wow. Amazing.
So, yeah, just sort of cobbled together, ways of paying the rent.
You seem to have a mantra of just doing things, getting stuck in, have an idea and follow it through.
Yeah, I think, partly, living in London is very expensive, and, a part-time teaching job. I always knew that I wanted to do something musical, and, teaching music was, the ultimate stable job as a starting point, but also just the ultimate way of, staying immersed in music. It's brilliant to teach young people specifically, but, I taught all the way up to sixth form. And by the time you're teaching sixth form, who at the time were only a few years younger than me, I just loved it.
Lovely.
Really, really loved it. It was a creative place. I'm still in touch with lots of my old students from a long time ago.
Who the age gap narrows as you get older, doesn't it? It must seem like, oh wow, you're my age almost.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's expensive to live here. So, I didn't particularly want to work in a bar. I know that's really brilliant. Some people love the idea of having something that will enable them to stay, to focus on the music, and then have something that is, non-musical in there as a sort of secondary income. But I was quite keen to have something that would stay musical. So I kept DJing at the weekends and had my own little production school thing.
Fabulous. That is absolutely brilliant. So, Alex, I ask all of my guests to leave an item and a piece of advice in the music room for others to find and hopefully benefit from. What item would you like to leave?
I have a really good think about this, and I thought, do I leave my violin? Because that's the thing that, I've used. I was like, no way. I never leave my violin anywhere.
I'm not sure I'd let you leave your violin.
No. I thought about the thing that I have chosen to leave is an old mixtape. And it's not a specific mixtape, but I think back to when I was younger and the things that inspired me the most. And actually that's the one thing I always come back to, and it's the one thing that I kind of always come back to today as well, is, the idea of being a little bit different and being myself. I think it's, I never, and, you spoke about trails right at the beginning. I didn't want to create something that other people, so they could sound like me, they want to be different. We all want to be a little bit different. And I think that's so important. And when I was much younger, I would always find music that people hadn't heard. I would do my absolute best. Spotify didn't exist those days. So it was rooting around in Virgin Records or Tower Records, which was in Piccadilly Circus back then. That was great.
With the booths, with the headphones.
Exactly, yeah. Headphone booths, they don't exist, do they, anymore? That's a shame. But yeah, just flicking through and finding stuff. And as soon as I heard, a friend also liked that, something in me just went, oh God, I got to find something else. And I still have that now, whether it's listening to something or, the type of music I write. I think why my style of music isn't necessarily a specific, while I don't focus on a specific style, is because, if I hear something different, I'll be like, oh, that's grabbing me now, or if someone else were to create a similar sound, then I'd like to find something a little bit different. Yeah. And I think that kind of keeps me inspired and keeps things fresh a little bit, and I think it all stems back to creating those old mixtapes of stuff that I've found back in the 90s, which is when I was a kid.
Wow, brilliant. And I think I can confirm that you are very good at sounding like yourself.
Good.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, you
nice
clearly put a lot of work into that, and it's really apparent when you hear your music. There is something about it that says, this is Alex Parsons. I'd like to think.
That's brilliant to hear. It's funny because you never hear it yourself.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
It's lovely to hear that.
So, what advice would you like to leave in the music room?
Advice? Well, I guess apart from the idea of being different, which I mentioned in my last thing, it's always good to sound, to have your own kind of sound. I think it's also really great to learn from other people as well and listen to what other people are doing. And I guess one thing that I would always say is just always be curious. Don't be afraid ever to ask questions. It doesn't matter what stage of your career you're at, ask questions. If there's something you don't understand, ask. If you're at a screening and there's, someone that you really want to find out what their role is in the film, ask them. I think that could be a really great way to learn about, what all of the different aspects of filmmaking are. And that can really influence your work. I think it's really important to just make sure you're always somewhere that you can be amongst other people to ask them questions. If there's an opportunity to be somewhere, don't ever miss that. Like, just go to that screening, go to the film festival, the event. If you happen to be in a, already partway through your career and you're in a mix, a dub mix, for example, go. Don't just let that happen. Try and get in that room and, find out what's happening. Speak to the dub mixer, speak to the exec producers who are often in there as well. It's just a really good thing to do, is just always be in that spot. And it's know when is a good time, I think, to ask the question, in some of those situations. But I think always being curious is something that's just a great thing. Learn all the time.
That's brilliant advice. And it extends it also to when you've been hired, to not be afraid if you think something's not quite right or something, just gain that understanding, seek that clarity, isn't it? Because ultimately you're all on the same side. You're all working towards the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be something as simple as, or something as important within the specific project as knowing an emotion that is needed at that particular point in the film. Or actually, it could be something that's a lot more specific to, a format. What's the frame rate? Or, actually, what's the best format for a dub mixer in order for him or her to do their best work? How do they want to receive the files? And if they then, if they then tell me that, then I can make sure they get that.
Lovely. Well, that advice is going into the music room. Always be curious. Alex Parsons, it has been an absolute joy chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for joining me in the music room.
Oh, thanks ever so much for having me. I really enjoyed that. It was really nice to kind of think about old times.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I loved it.
Thanks for listening to the Music Room podcast today. If you'd like to know more about the show or the community that surrounds it, head to musicroom.community. The link is in the show notes.